What to do if you're stuck. Hitting a wall in your electronic music production can be incredibly frustrating. I have been there many times myself and have learned ways to get over the plateaus in my skills or plateaus in my creativity, and I want to share some of those with you today. Hopefully you will find these helpful for getting yourself over a hump of learning or just out of an uninspired rut. Putting a focus back on the fundamentals of music production is very important whether you're a new producer or a more experienced one, and I'll explain why. If you're a new producer, there's a lot of stuff that you haven't learned yet, and chances are you've been trying to just dive in, make stuff, which is not a bad approach at all. That's the approach that I took, but it can be a little slow because you don't know what you don't know, and you're probably trying to do a whole bunch of stuff all at once that you're new to, and it's not coming together the way that you hear it in your head or coming together in the way that music by some of your heroes came together. I can say that because I have absolutely been there, beating my head against the wall going, why isn't this working? Why can't I make something that just sounds good? And the answer is I didn't have the fundamentals under my belt yet. You know, I knew my way around my DAW. I've played drums for years, so I have a bit of a musical background, but I hadn't really brushed up on music theory. I knew nothing about sound design or mixing, and so of course my stuff wasn't gonna come out sounding all that good. It was boring, it was repetitive, it was derivative, it was messy. It wasn't good. And it didn't start to get good until I took the time to slog through learning a bit of music theory. You don't need to learn to read music or even play piano. Just learning some basic scales and chords is a decent start. And then I contented myself to rely on presets for a while longer while I learned some mixing stuff, and that allowed me to get much more polish into my music. And I would recommend learning a little bit of synthesis early on because that will help you pick your synth plugins and presets better. That's not something that's essential to learn, but it is really helpful. And I've got a whole video on the very basics for complete beginners, and I'll link that at the end of this video. Regardless, depending on how much musical or technical background you have, be really critical and try to identify your biggest bottleneck, the biggest thing holding you back, and then spend some targeted time dealing with it. Doing some learning, maybe on YouTube videos, a book, a Skillshare class, something like that. Not a sponsor, I've never used them before, but whatever. You get the idea. On the same topic, if you are an experienced producer, I would still recommend taking a look at the fundamentals again, because chances are you've gotten bogged down in technical details and you haven't spent enough time focusing purely on songwriting or designing interesting sounds or keeping your mixing process simple but targeted. The songwriting one is especially important. I talked about this in my biggest mistakes I made in my music production journey video. It's really easy to focus on the technical aspects or just trying to get a groove going without focusing on coming up with catchy chord progressions and melodies or an interesting song structure. If you feel like you've stalled, focus on that, because ultimately that's what listeners are gonna care about. They want an interesting song. And if the sounds are interesting but the song isn't, the sounds aren't gonna do anything for you. One reason that people struggle to get the sounds that they've heard in other music is that they actually don't know it as well as they think they do. Our musical memory is great for like melodic lines and stuff, but isn't as good for like exact layers in a song unless you're really paying attention. And this is something I've learned to do over time through deliberately sitting down, sometimes even with a pen and paper, and writing down every layer I hear and maybe even where they sit in the frequency and stereo spectrum. This is something I would absolutely advise that you do. I've advised it before on this channel because it was incredibly helpful for me to really pick apart songs that I like, figure out exactly the elements that went into them, and then figure out piece by piece how to recreate those. And if you want to take that a step farther, try actually recreating a song or a section of a song that you like. You're not going to be releasing this anywhere. This is purely for practice. You start by imitating your favorites, ripping them off, copying what they do, and then you can start to come up with original stuff, put your own spin on it, and start breaking the rules that you've now learned. And if you can't recreate something, especially if it's something really complicated, try not to get too discouraged. Once again, look at the fundamentals of songwriting, sound design, and mixing, and see if you can target one of those skills to get yourself closer to the thing that you're trying to copy. And once again, don't rip off other people's work, don't pass it off as your own. This is purely a learning process and an important one. But at the very least, pick apart music that you like and learn to listen for layers, individual elements, and little details. What if your skills are actually in a pretty good place, but you're just feeling completely dry and uninspired. In that case, I would recommend listening to some completely novel or unfamiliar music. Get yourself out of your musical comfort zone, listen to a different genre, listen to some new artists, it doesn't have to be something super out there, but it could be if you want it to be. Listen to something that gets you out of the rut that you've fallen into, because chances are you've started to rely on genre stereotypes and kept your musical bubble too tight. Broaden your horizons, bring in a myriad of influences, and try to mesh them in a way that feels authentic to you and your taste in music. For instance, for me, I love kind of modern hip hop and trap, and I also love synthwave and like 80s style electronic music, and so I've tried to bring those two together. Or I love metal and electronic music, so I've tried to bring those together. And the way that I combine elements of different genres is going to be different from the way that other people combine elements of different genres, because we all experience those styles of music differently. So expand your taste in music and bring in influences from outside your genre. And as a bonus piece of advice, try listening to new music while in motion. Take a power walk around the block, go for a run or something like that, maybe even go for a drive. I found that new music hits differently when I'm moving and out and about. And obviously, mid-pandemic, be very careful and considerate of others, but still, there are safe ways to get some movement in and experience new music, and that just might lead you to feeling much more inspired. Final piece of advice, if you're feeling uninspired, take some sort of challenge, like make music from items around your house, no real instruments allowed, or limit the amount of layers you're allowed to use. Or if you don't like how minimalist your production is, force yourself to use a certain high number of layers. Or make it so that your song must have this many complete switch-ups. Something that will force you into a constraint will often help you be more creative within that constraint. Necessity is the mother of invention, so creating some necessity can help you create some invention. If you'd like to go further in either building up the fundamentals or getting song ideas, you can click or tap up over here for a super beginner-friendly sound design tutorial, or you can click down here for a pretty exhaustive list on ways to come up with song ideas. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit. Peace!